Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures with Andy. It's time for the August 2021 die-along with ChemKnits. Now, originally I wasn't planning on taking part in the die-along this month. I actually haven't done it for the past couple of months just because life and schedule and available time. But then Rebecca released the inspiration photo and I felt a little bit called out. I felt a bit like she was saying, Andy, I see you've not been taking part lately. Get off your butt, stop procrastinating, put some yarn and some dye, do this. Why? Because this is the picture she chose. Y'all, it's a book. I'm a writer. She chose a picture that is a book with glasses on it as the inspiration photo for my birthday month. So when I saw this picture, I'm like, all right, okay, you know what? I see your challenge. I accept your challenge, Rebecca. In fact, I more than accept your challenge. I exceed this challenge. Because today, we're not gonna dye a skein of yarn. We are gonna dye a book. And not just any book. We're gonna dye a book inspired by 4 of the short stories that I've had published. I've got a cover that I knitted, and I've got 4 pages that I knitted. Why 4? No particular reason. Just that if I had kept knitting pages, I would never have gotten around to making this video and dyeing the book. And these long strings that you see here, they are still in here for a reason, and they're brown for a reason. Because after we dye the pages and the cover and everything is set, washed, and dried, I'm going to use these strings to stitch the pages into the book. We're going to be dyeing the cover brown like leather. So I did what would normally be a provisional cast on using waste yarn, but I didn't take that waste yarn out. I left it on, and I specifically chose a brown yarn for that waste yarn so that it would blend in better with the cover. And then each of these 4 pages will be dyed differently based on the story that it's representing. And I knitted all of this out of Cascade 128 superwash wool yarn. It took a little more than 1 skein to dye this. I probably could have knitted another 3 pages with what I had left over in the second skein, maybe. But again, if I had kept knitting pages, I would never have gotten a chance to actually dye the yarn. And you know, I'm already in the middle of September when I'm filming this. I can't put it off too much longer. And we're also going to be using this yarn as a yarn mop. I'm sure you recognize it. We have used it as a yarn mop before. It's the one that ended up being green after the last time I used it as a yarn mop, but where it's got these little sections of red from the first time it was used as a yarn mop, I think. And it definitely still needs something more on it so that those red spots look a little bit more intentional. So we're going to use it as our yarn mop today. I've got our dye stocks of black, royal blue, and teal blue of the Wilton's Icing gel. But I do need to mix up some more colors to have a full palette of everything that I'm going to be using for this dyeing. I've got some Wilton's No Taste Red, brown, Kelly Green, which hopefully I have enough of. If not, I'm gonna have to look and see if I have some more in my bin, or just grab some green from one of my other stashes, just not Wilton's. Wilton's Copper, which hopefully this does come out as copper, because one of these stories, I really need sort of a bronze copper color. Burgundy, which might or might not get used. It depends on what color it turns out to be. I need something that looks like dried blood. Yeah. Fair warning, y'all. I write speculative fiction and horror, so these are going to be inspired by, I think all of these are horror stories. The 4 that I happen to pick, I guess no, one of them is true speculative fiction. That would be Frost. But the other 3 of these are inspired by horror stories that I wrote. So yeah, there's going to be some dark subject material in here. Fair warning. And lastly, I have golden yellow. I might need sort of a gold color for one of them. The same one that I need the copper for, actually. Or not, we'll see. And I also might need some yellow because I do need a gray for at least one of these, probably more than one. And we know that we can color correct our black with some yellow to make a gray. So I also have some xanthan gum. I have not used this since I dyed the yarn for the ChemKnits dye along, where we looked at the passage of time. I'm going to do it again though today, just because I want these colors to stay where I put them in a lot of the cases. There's going to be some where I'm going to want it to mix around, but some where I want to actually paint it on to, this essentially it's a blank, it's a yarn blank, and have it stay where I put it. So I'm going to need the xanthan gum for that. There's also some places where I'm probably going to want some resist so that I keep some white, and xanthan gum without any dye in it will work for that. I'm going to be smart about it this time though. I'm going to try not to mix up too much xanthan gum. We'll see how that goes. But the first thing I need to do before I can do anything else, I need to set our knitted book in some water and vinegar to soak. I'm not going to worry about that with the yarn mop. It can be dry for now. And I need to go ahead and mix up 1% dye stocks for these other 6 colors that I've got. All right, our dye stocks are all mixed up. Now it's time to dye our yarn book. Chad's over here directing and I don't know what I'm doing. All right, so the first thing that we're going to dye is the cover. Now I soaked all of this in a solution of tap water and vinegar, soaked it overnight and all day today as I was prepping. So I was prepping to do this, and we're ready to go now. Now, like I said, I wanted to dye this so it looks sort of like the cover of an old leather-bound book. So I'm going to start by putting this in here. Well, actually, first, I'm going to start by pouring a little bit of our brown dye stock into this jar. And then put this in here. Pour a little bit more in. A little bit over here. And then pour some more on top. I'm wanting to get just kind of a nice base at this point on this. And just poke it all down with a craft stick. I'm going to have messy fingers. I will have to go wash them again. Just want to make sure that there's no places that are still white, but I still want to have some places that are going to end up darker than others, hopefully. And I may end up coming back and doing a second round with this. We'll see. That'll be good for a start. And I'm just going to set this to the side. I'm not going to put it in any heat yet. I'm just going to let it sit. For the individual pages, I did just some quick watercolor ideas just to think on paper about the design that I want to do. And I did one for each of these. And I'm going to be using some sponge brushes and just painting at least a reasonable facsimile of this on each of them. And I've got them here on some aluminum foil. They're mostly not curling up on the edge. The top and one side and the bottom have ribbing. I knitted them with ribbing, but I did not knit this side, this is going to be the inside edge, with ribbing because it's going to get stitched into the cover of the book. So it didn't really need it, but it does curl up just a little bit. I could try. See, I don't really want to do the back of it, but I am just going to go ahead and spread it out on here. I don't want to pin it to like a towel or a sponge or anything because that would end up soaking up the dye, and I want the dye to stay in the knitting. And then once I've got the design painted on here, I will just fold this aluminum foil over, fold it up, set it up, sew the side, move to the next one. Now, I am probably going to end up with far more dye that I need a yarn mop for, far more dye left over than what this yarn mop can handle. But fear not, for over here, on the other side of my table, I am filming a bonus episode where I am going to make sure that that extra dye does not get left behind using these two skeins of yarn. So stay tuned for that one. It will be coming up in a future episode. All right, so I'm gonna need gray, which as we know, we don't really have a gray. We've got Wilton's black. We're just gonna use it lightly and see if we can come up with gray. We're gonna have to dilute it a lot and it's probably gonna break because that's what black food coloring does. I'm gonna take a little bit of this black and I'm gonna pour it over into this one so that I can add it to the teal and possibly a little bit of royal blue to see if I can mix up sort of a blued steel color. And last, I'm gonna need dark brown and then really, really light brown. And I'm gonna get the light brown just by diluting it with water. And one other thing I need is, I have mixed up some xanthan gum. Now I mixed up a whole lot here and this is probably a lot more than I need, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't really, really too thick. Scoop out a tablespoon of it. Because I just want to thicken up that brown. The first short story that we're going to dye a page for is called ChemKnits Mordigen. And this is the first short story that I ever got published. Not the first one that I ever got accepted. That was a story called Andontina for Pau Brazil. But just because of the vagaries of publishing, the magazine that published ChemKnits Mordigen actually came out with its issue before the one that did Andontina for Pau Brazil. ChemKnits Mordigen features a main character named Basil Quinlan, who when he was on a vacation bought a really unusual carved wooden box. It had just this mesmerizing design carved into it. You could never find the beginning or the end, and it would almost draw you into it and sort of mesmerize you to almost try to get you to open the box, but you should never do. And he was told that in order to save himself, he needed to take this box to a very specific church in Kutna Hora, just outside Prague in the Czech Republic. And he is being accompanied by two bodyguards named Sharps and Dinwoody. When he is there, the church at Kutna Hora, and this is an actual church, and I got the idea for this short story when a friend of mine was telling me about a trip that she and her husband were going to take, and they were going to visit this church. And it's got all of these amazing sculptures in it that are made from human bone. And I read up about the church and it just absolutely fascinated me. So the colors in here, the dark brown and some of the lighter browns, represent that wooden box that Basil has to deliver to the monk at this church, so that he can be free of it. There's some sort of very off-white, very light gray, some might say bone-colored patches that represent the bones of the sculptures in the ossuary, and then just some tan in here to represent, you know, just different colors in the box and throughout the church. And there was a pivotal moment in the story where Basil, Sharps, and Dinwiddie are under attack, and Basil has a gun, but he is frozen. He's not defending himself. He's not defending Sharps and Dinwiddie. They're being overrun. And Sharps yells out, "For the love of God, Basil, shoot!" And if Basil had shot his gun and started fighting, then they would have had a chance to survive. But he didn't. And I wanted to make this sort of a blued steel, like the blued steel of guns that I've heard of. I don't own guns. I don't know. I'm not a gun expert. So that's what this is. It's that pivotal moment in this blued steel. And then because he doesn't and things do not go well, the gray at the top is the color of ghoul flesh, because that is the fate that awaits Basil. The next short story that we're going to die is called Frost. And we've got our blank page here. A writer's worst nightmare, a blank page. And we're going to need some dark brown, some green, some black to make our different grades of gray, and then some very light blue and just a little bit of our red. So unlike Cascade and Merino, where we needed the precision of the brushes to make like the swirls and the design from the box, we don't need that as much for Frost. So I'm going to see if I can use syringes. I've got 3 of them over here. We're going to see what we can do with them. I'm probably going to have to resort to brushes as well, because I've only got 3 syringes, possibly 4 if I go digging around somewhere. Frost. It's an origin story that I wrote. It's, you know, the origin of Jack Frost, who actually starts out as someone named Yoko Frosty, is captured and essentially tortured into gaining the ability to create frost just by touching things, and then escapes. So this one actually goes from left to right. And we start out with just dark brown and greens, you know, olive greens, dark greens, basically a forest. So we start out with really dark brown and green, and then we fade to a dark gray, and then a lighter gray, and then into a light blue. When we get to this light blue, just fade out into white, like the white of just pure ice or snow, because snow is just essentially a whole bunch of ice crystals all piled up together. You'll notice there are some patches of white throughout here. It's not an oversight on my part. I purposely left them because we're going to try to leave some little patches of white throughout all over on the page to symbolize the white of the frost and the snow. And there's also a spattering of red dots over the top of it. We've got some green over here. We've got some green over here, this blue section, and some pink, and that's for the foliage that he finds outside when he emerges from the dungeon when he escapes, which is beautiful and green and colorful with flowers until he touches it and steps on it, and it just gets covered and killed by frost, very much against his will. But there are some little spatterings of dots of red all throughout here, and that's because when he escapes his cell in the dungeon, he discovers that a friend of his named Nicholas was also captured and is being held prisoner there. And he is also being tortured, but he is being tortured in an entirely different way from Jack. His torture involves a red brick fireplace. I'm guessing you can figure out who that is. And unfortunately, he has to leave Nicholas behind. He promises he'll come back, but he has to leave him behind. So the red spots are both for the red brick of the fireplace and also for just the bloody condition that Nicholas is in when Jack finds him. All right, next up is lateral genetics. So for this, we're gonna need some gray, and I've still got some left over from the last one that we did, and hopefully that should be good. We're also gonna need some brown and some red. Now the brown, I'm gonna need to try to splatter it on. I would speckle it if I had something to speckle with, but I don't. I would just try to splatter it on. And then the red, I had originally mixed up this No Taste red and the McCormick's because I wanted just red, but I'm now thinking that the burgundy actually might be a better color to represent blood. So that's what we're gonna go with. Now burgundy, there is one of the food colors that's in here for some reason, it just likes to crash out of solution a lot. I mean, I mixed this up and, you know, mixed this up yesterday, and this morning it was already crashed out. So I'm just gonna mix up some. And if I need to go over it with just some of that red, then we will do that. Writers are familiar with what happened with this story. I actually wrote it, it got accepted for an anthology, and then nothing ever happened with the anthology. And I waited several years, didn't hear anything, so I contacted them, told them I was withdrawing my submission. Ended up submitting it to a different anthology, and it was published 2019 in an anthology by Stygian Fox, which I was very happy about because I do like this story. It was a really good one. So in this story, Harold Icks is infected by these fungal spores, these brown spores, when he is crawling under a house inspecting it. And it actually changes his body on a cellular level by these fungal spores replacing his cellular DNA with its own and transforming his cells into basically this, you know, really thick white fungus. I mean, every single bit of him. And he becomes this horrible monster. Completely loses all of his capacity for human thought or anything. Epidemiological experts are brought in to fight what, you know, it first looks like just an infection and possibly an outbreak of some sort of infection. And quarantine protocols are put in place. Now, I would like to say, bear in mind, I wrote this story, I will have to check, but I think it was like 2008, 2007. So we weren't even living in this house when I wrote this story. So this way predates current events. So anyway, experts in infections are brought in, and they do research, finally figure out a way to combat this. And they're able to spray it with a chemical that dissolves it and turns it into this milky gray liquid. It just dissolved into this milky gray liquid. Unfortunately, by then, Harold has made it to the blood bank, which is just a massive, massive resource of cells for him. So we've got here some white space, which is the white of the spongy fungus material that his body turns into. We've got the very pale gray, that is what the fungus dissolves into when it's sprayed with the chemical. We've got the red of all of the blood in the blood bank that Harold, as the fungus, decide to go and turn into more of the fungus. And then we've got some splatters of brown for the brown spores that are what originally infected Harold. Last but not least, we have green water. You've heard me mention this story before in a video, and no, I still haven't come out with a colorway design around it. I will though eventually. Like I said before, I'd like to come up with colorways inspired by lots of different pieces of work that I've done, stories and RPG projects and all kinds of stuff. Green water takes place in Aquae Sulis, what is now known as Bath in the modern day UK. But it takes place during the time of the Roman Empire, after Rome has conquered the Druids and taken over and turned Aquae Sulis into essentially a resort for the wealthy to go and partake of the baths there and the waters there. And in Green Water, the main character, a woman named Quamanai, avenges her son's death at the hands of the Roman legions by going to Aquae Sulis and using a tooth from her son and the broken pieces of a druid's crown to spill her own blood in the pool, in Solis's pool, her goddess's pool, and her goddess answers her call and turns her into this green liquid monster. So she is capable of flowing through the baths and killing the Romans who killed her son. I've got blue for the water of the pool. I've got copper here for the Druid's crown. I do not have a bronze color. Technically the Druid's crown would have been bronze, and it is bronze in the story, but I don't have a bronze color, so we're going to use copper for that instead. And red to represent her blood being spilled. We have different splotches of the teal blue, a light teal blue, and copper, burgundy for the red, and then just a really light, incredibly light brown like we did for the bone in Kotsa Morticia. So we'll do that here at the top and then have this green, just little speckles of the green in amongst that too, and then just have this green spill down over this gold intermixed with, it's really hard to tell in here, there's some more of the blue in there, and that represents the Romans in the baths. And then down here at the bottom we've got more of a brown for a stone color, and then more of the red for the blood that the Romans shed, and also for Quamanai getting her revenge. And the last thing I'm going to do is, this is our book cover. And remember I said I wanted it to look like old leather? We've got brown, but we've also got some patches that are just still white. And you can see, by the way, the dye bath has exhausted. This is actually day 2 of me doing this, so this sat overnight and exhausted the dye bath. So we're going to put this back in here, and I've got our brown here. I'm going to add in a little bit of our burgundy for some color differentiation. Actually, no, that was our copper. It's going to give us an orangish color. That's okay. Here, my brown. And I'm going to add some black and see what we come up with on color. It's still pretty light. I want that darker. Like a dark walnut brown. Yeah, that's a good color. Make sure that's all stirred up okay. And I am just going to, wow, I'm a mess, aren't I? Okay, I'm just going to pour this in there. all in there. And here's our stick. Push things down with. Clean everything up because I made a mess. Of course. I guess that's how you can tell you're having fun. You make a huge, horrible mess. Alright, I'm just going to look through and make sure that there aren't any spots that look like they are obviously not getting any color. I will still probably have some pale patches, and that's okay. This is some of the water and vinegar mixture that I soaked everything in. I'm just going to pour that over the top, just to help it set. Okay, that looks good. I'm gonna put the lid on. I'm gonna clean the lid off. I gotta clean up the rest of my mess. Oh my God, I just have made a disaster here, haven't I? Okay, and I'm just gonna let this sit here inside the garage for the rest of the day. At least for a while. And I'm going to take all of our little page packets and put them out on the deck so they can get some heat and do a little bit of steaming. I don't want to take this out because it's in a glass jar and it shouldn't cause any problems with fading because it's still wet. But brown does have some red in it, and I've had problems with some red food colorings fading even inside. So I'm just gonna leave that one in here instead of doing solo dyeing with it for now because I don't want any white patches on it. These are completely sealed in their little aluminum foil packets, so they should be fine to just sit out there in the sun. I think it's supposed to get to like 88 today, and then later on, probably around 5-ish, I'll come out here and steam set everything for a little while just to make sure that it's good. And then I'll just have to wash it, rinse it, let it dry, and then stitch the book together and show you what we came up with. So I will be back when that's done. And here's our finished book. Now normally this is the part where I would go over the project, show you what we ended up with, point out the things I liked, point out the things I thought I could have done better. But this is a book, and typically with books you have somebody else do a book review. So I thought that's what we would do today. We would have Chad go through this and give a review of this book, tell what it is, what he liked about it, what he didn't like about it, give some overall thoughts and impressions. So without further ado, take it away, Chad.
Thanks for the lead in, Andy. Here is your finished book. First and foremost, it does look like a nice aged leather book, or possibly even a suede bound book. One of Andy's favorite books to collect are the Roycrofter books, and they produced in the early 20th century a series of small suede bound books, such as this one, which is Lord Byron. As you can see, suede bound, nice and mottled. Does have some wear in the corners. And let's compare that to Andy's. We've got modeling right here, okay, and you can see it's a soft cover, just like this, nice and suede. This isn't suede, but it's close enough for our purposes. And there is even some wear in the corners. Andy managed to create an aged book nicely. And now let's flip it open. First up, we have Cascade and Mordigin, and a strange thing did happen with this one. We have a perfectly straight line that carries all the way through from top to bottom, and it causes a shift in tone. This was originally all painted the same color, but for some reason when the tone shifted, we ended up with a greenish half and a purplish half. And down here, also green and purple, and then also a lighter brown and a more rust-colored brown. also came through all the way on the back. So not sure what happened here, but overall, I do think this page turned out nice and is representative of ChemKnits and more Digital. And then here we have Frost. And Andy was going for a cold look. And as you can see, I think she nailed it with the transitions from the blue to the white. And also you've got the brown and the grays, the dungeon. You've got Jack basically emerging in his new life as Yokel Frosty. This is lateral genetics. And we've got here, as you can see, all the blood spatters in the blood bank. Get some of the spores right here and here and here from the fungus or whatever it was. Really, it was more of a creature, less of a fungus. Or more of really something you don't want and less of a fungus. Although I guess you probably don't want a fungus either. But hey. And you got the graying skin. And last but not least, we have green water. And with green water here, this one I think is probably my favorite. You've got the water, and then you've got the gold of Rome basically sinking into the water. Got the blood from where she smashed the tooth out of the druid, and all nice representations there. And there's the back of that one. Here's the back of this cover, and the back of the cover. Returning to green water just for a second, the fade from the yellowish gold into the green is very subtle, very nicely done. And unlike that straight line in ChemKnits and more Digital, it is very tapered so that it gives a nice blended effect. Overall, well done book. In the Roycrofters, they usually placed a portrait of the author in the book. So maybe we should have Andy knit up a little portrait here of herself and place it right there, just to be more representative of the Roycrofter book. But I hope you had fun with this, and hope you had fun watching Andy create a book from yarn, and hope you see us on our next adventure. Bye.